G'day, I'm Nick Clements from Your QS and welcome to our podcast Beyond the Guestimate. I've been involved in the construction sector since 1993 and pretty much the whole time I've been frustrated with the inefficiencies and how the sector works, and it's sort of become the ethos of our business as looking for ways to improve and how we can be more efficient as a business and as an industry. And in this podcast I like to explore things along those lines, so not only around the construction sector but also around business and how we can improve both of them. So it sort of reflects my areas of interest. Today we're talking health and safety. So before you push next on the videos, just hang on a sec. It's a bit more interesting than what you like. I've actually learned a lot about it over the years. I think as everybody has in the industry, it's become a factor that wasn't there when it started. I can remember the first time I came across the term, I was a sales engineer and selling to New Zealand Steel, and I'd been asked by one of the plant engineers to go and see this guy at the pipe mill. And I go and see him and I introduced him, I can't remember what his name was, and he said, I'm the health and safety manager. And I remember thinking, no, what's your real job? Yeah, that isn't a job. And yeah, so that was sort of my first exposure to it. And then a bit later on, like a few years later, I was a branch manager at Carter's, and that was in the mid-90s, early 90s. And it was when health and safety was starting to become a legislative thing, and so most corporates were having to put sort of health and safety systems in. And so in my branch, I was in charge of putting in health and safety in the branch. And it was a real battle. Yeah, we had yardmen, and I was trying to convince them they'd been doing their job for 20 years, 30 years or whatever. And I was saying, oh no, you got to wear gloves, you got to wear goggles. And it really was a bit of a battle to convince them. And we had the odd injury every now and then, but everybody put it down to just bad luck. And then I sort of realised that there is a bit more to it. And then one of the other things we brought in when I was at the head office at Carter's was putting your hand on the stair rail as you walk down the stairs. And I realised that I'm always fast with what I'm doing, so I tend to trip going upstairs more often than going down. And I've got into the habit of just running my hand on top of the stairs, and it's actually saved me quite a few times, both directions, going up and down. And I realised that it's a lot of health and safety is actually a process thing. And if you've seen any of my podcasts, I'm really big on process. And I've realised that health and safety isn't around a whole bunch of rules. It's around looking at understanding what processes are and looking at what little changes you can make to those processes to improve them. So my technique with the stairs, I now just run my hand down the stairs, and it's something that's just become a habit. And that's a health and safety thing. It's not actually a big deal. It's not a box to tick or whatever, but it's just reducing the risk of it happening. And I had those of you who know me, I ride cycles, and I crashed going down my drive a few weeks ago. My drive is really steep. It's like 45 degrees, and there's a blind corner right in the middle of it. And so I was going down the drive as per normal, just turned down the middle of it, and my neighbour's daughter was coming up the drive on the blind bit right on the steep part. And braking on the bike, I can slow down, but I can't stop. And something I learned from the health and safety stuff at New Zealand Steel was you ask a question, what could I have done differently? And so we could have said that's just bad luck. She happened to be coming up. We've been there 26 years. This has never happened before. You could say it's just bad luck. We happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But if you ask the question, what could I have done differently? I start thinking, well, okay, I could have braked a bit more before I turned down that 45 degree area. We could put a mirror on the top of the house there so we can actually see around the corner. So there's things from a process point of view that we could do differently that actually reduce the chance of that accident happening. So that's, to me, a lot of the learnings from health and safety is it's actually thinking about process and thinking about what things can you change to reduce the risk of accidents happening. And so while people might see health and safety as a bit boring, if you pick underneath it, there's a lot to learn from how people go about health and safety processes. And I think we can take that thinking and the methodologies they used for health and safety to apply in other areas of our business. So bit of a long diatribe, but today my guest is Bronwen she's the Group Health and Safety Manager with Acro. So I've known Bronwen for a little while, not that well, but vicariously, really. She's a good friend of my wife. They worked together at Fletcher's, and she, in fact, actually worked at Carter's as well, but after my time. So welcome, Bronwen. Thanks for coming along. So what's your current role?
Group Health and Safety Manager at Acro Group.
Hopefully what I said didn't offend you in any way.
No. So Acro Group owns a number of businesses based around scaffolding. So, that's where I am.
And I guess, obviously health and safety is a pretty big factor with...
working at heights is a big risk in scaffolding. Yeah.
So what got you into this sort of space to start with? Did you, when you were going through school, were you aspiring to be a health and safety manager?
Definitely not. No, I actually started my undergraduate degree in psychology, and I love social psychology, so that's where I would have loved to have worked, but unfortunately there's not a lot of career options in social psychology. So after my undergraduate degree, I went into the business faculty and did a master's degree in business. And my first day, I'd enrolled in all the HR papers, and I went to my first lot of lectures and really didn't like it. So switched over to health and safety then, and continued on and finished my master's in occupational health and safety. And that was in the mid to late 90s.
Right.
So really, really junior in the health and safety industry in New Zealand, yeah.
And so when I say we were at Carter's, we were doing it in the early 90s, that seemed to be pretty early. So is that sort of when it started becoming a thing?
Yeah. So when I graduated, it was really tough to get a job in health and safety. There were just no health and safety jobs in that late 90s period. There were a few, but very few and far between. And they tended to have a real job as well. So it was health and safety and something else. Yeah. Fortunately enough, I managed to get a job at Middlemore Hospital.
Okay.
So I started my career there, but pretty quickly figured out I'm not great in medical areas. The doctors and nurses and everything, they do amazing, but not my stomach and can't tolerate that area. So I unfortunately moved into Goodman Fielder.
So that's manufacturing business? Yeah.
So it was quite different to what it is now. So it was being brought out and subdivided and separated up. But when I was there, it was one of the biggest food manufacturing places in New Zealand. So I was working out of the Bluebird plant, and then I ended up managing half of the business from a health and safety point of view. I found that a really great experience because they had leadership in health and safety from Australia, and so picked up a lot of knowledge about practical application of health and safety, and it was all behavioural based, which I think New Zealand's only really starting to grasp now.
Right.
Yeah. So, it was a really great introduction to health and safety, and I learned a lot in that process. Yeah.
And so, so there was manufacturing. When did you? So you've been in construction for a while. So what was the path from manufacturing into construction?
Yeah, so I went from Goodman Fielder to Heinz, and again another international company. Learned a lot around international health and safety. So some really great experiences in that space. And then I went to Carter's, as you mentioned. I think that was a really good space as well because that was starting to look at safety from a critical risk perspective. So previously, health and safety, particularly because of the ACC partnership program, businesses had really focused on lost time injuries, medical treatment injuries, and sort of that manual handling space. And it was really difficult to get businesses to focus on those critical risks where you're actually looking at things that can kill people or seriously harm. And you don't get a second chance with those things. Whereas people, the philosophy around the ACC management program was to reduce injuries, and so that was very manual handling based. So it kind of made businesses really focus on that because they had to pay for any injuries. So they really focused on reducing those manual handling injuries, forgetting about the critical risks. So it was really great to go to Carter's, and they had Carter at Harvey had a real big focus on critical risks. So that was great. And then after my 5 years there,
So just on that critical risk thing, is that something that they identified, or did that come through from sort of legislation? Or
no, I think it's a little bit of a mixture. So they, because Rank Group owns Carter's, they were very risk focused anyway as a business. Graham Hart's very focused in that space, and it was kind of it sort of rolled out of that, looking at safety as a risk and managing it as a critical risk rather than trying to focus on what injuries you have. So it was really focused around what can we do to prevent those one-off incidents that people get killed.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and being a sort of thing, a lot of it came out of the sawmills, very, very high risk. They had a few fatalities there, and that kind of made them rethink how they thought about health and safety. And that was, from what I understand, they're one of the first companies to actually really start looking at it as a critical risk-based. And they really, at that time, which is still something that's really difficult to get across with these with the large businesses, they moved completely away from recording lost time injury rates, medical treatment rates. They just didn't see that as something of value.
Yeah, and so actually that was my experience when we started with Carter's, and sort of what I've found with KPIs, so whether it was health and safety, or I can remember when in my time at Carter's, with the sawmills around, say, things like delivery on time, is that you put KPIs in place and all the focus goes on how can we improve the KPI. So what can we manipulate to make the KPI look better, as opposed to the KPI is supposed to be a measure of the process and reflecting changes in the process, but they end up spending all this time managing the KPI as opposed to managing the underlying process.
Absolutely,
So the whole health and safety thing became a bit of a tick boxing thing. And my understanding of the sort of lost time injuries was they were like an early warning indicator of potentially something worse happening. So you actually wanted to record them because they gave you a potential thing that might go wrong to look for. But the box ticking thing meant you wanted to try and minimise them and talk people out of recording them or whatever. So there was almost like an internal conflict. So that sounds like that changed. So I've been out of that loop for quite a while. So it sounds like that risk-based approach is sort of addressing some of that?
Yeah. So they completely moved away. They measured their TRIFR rate, which is, but they
So what rate was it?
TRIFR, total recordable injury frequency rate.
Okay, yeah.
I think that's what it's called. So they moved away from that. The KPIs moved away from the lost time injuries because exactly that. You found people would have an injury and the managers, because it was a KPI linked to their performance bonuses, they would go visit that person at home.
Yeah, you sure you didn't do it playing rugby or something?
Yeah, that was part of it. But then even if they knew it was a genuine injury, they would try and get people to read a manual in their bed or do something to make it not a lost time injury. And that's sort of linked with the same with the ACC partnership program. They sort of drove that behaviour quite strongly, and we're sort of getting away from that. And I know in Australia they've really moved away from the recordable rate measure.
Which sort of becomes like sticking a Band-Aid over it as opposed to stopping it happen in the first place.
Yeah, and it's actually not what it was designed for. So it's actually OSHA in America actually started the recordable frequency rate, and they actually have very clear guidelines around how to measure it. But that's not the purpose it was intended, but it's the only international standard that there is. So that's what people grasp. But as you figured out my time at Carter's, as people manipulate it. So actually comparing TRIFRs doesn't actually, to me, isn't that meaningful. There's different ways of calculating it. There's different ways that people classify injuries. So there's a lot of businesses. It really frustrates me when people start, saying, "Oh, I haven't had a lost time injury for so many hours," and it's just so irrelevant. And then you don't believe it is because people are just covering it up or whatever. So it's those KPIs had good intentions, but unfortunately didn't quite serve the purpose.
So would it be right then that the sort of risk-based approach is trying to look more at the underlying processes and underlying causes?
Yeah.
And looking to try and eliminate those. So coming back to my opening monologue was, what could I do differently to avoid this happening? And there may be things you can do that aren't that different, but they actually take away the risk of that particular thing happening altogether.
Absolutely, yeah. So yes, focusing. So a big one is like focusing, like probably quite good example, like traffic management, keeping your pedestrians well away from your vehicles. And because if a load falls on a track and it falls onto a person, well, there's not really a lot of coming back from that. So sort of really focusing around that space rather than in the manufacturing space, because it's the same process over and over again. You're able to get to the heavy lifting done by machinery, but then the manual handling of the continuously packing and stuff, that becomes a bigger issue.
Yeah, okay. So that was one of the areas I was interested in exploring, was sort of what have you seen as the differences between your experience in manufacturing and then say your experience in construction? So that sounds like one is that manufacturing tends to be repeatable things, so you can look at a very defined set of things and say, can we change those? Whereas construction is way more variable.
Absolutely, yeah. In manufacturing, it's the same every day, the same machine, you're making the same product. There may be some minor variations.
And if somebody's getting a sore right arm for doing whatever, you can look at what can we do to solve that.
Absolutely. And guarding standards are really important in that space, and making sure people can't access machinery and equipment. So that's in the food manufacturing space, looking at guarding, lockout procedures becomes like key to avoiding those big injuries. Whereas in construction, like you said, it's just constantly changing, and that's the biggest challenge. Is no 2 days are the same. Every hour is different, and trying to manage that is just a completely different space. I mean, you go to some of these larger construction sites, there's vehicles everywhere, people everywhere, and it's just
some big
chaos.
machines,
So
and heights, and
so it's a much bigger challenge because it's different, just so different.
So when you're approaching a site, how do you go about figuring out? Because I guess for you, it's a bit the same, that you got to prioritise where you're going to spend your time. So how do you go figuring out, starting to deal with health and safety processes on a site?
So I mean, the critical risk always comes first. So just having a look at what the job is. So even civil and vertical have different critical risks depending on the nature of the work.
So maybe what's an example of a critical risk?
Say falling from heights. Just falling from heights, being run over by a truck or
swinging.
And there's been plenty of fatalities, unfortunately, in the construction space. We're still one of the leading industries for fatalities in New Zealand. So, so still got a lot of work to do in that space. But it's that variability, I think, is the real hard place, hard bit to get those controls and get people thinking, because you can't rely on that straight process of doing the same thing over and over again. So it's really about getting people to think for themselves and, like you said, what can I do differently to get home safely today?
So if you're identifying those critical risks, then sort of what's your next step? So say you've got a critical risk, how do you go about dealing with that? So my current role, I'm in scaffolding, so I've learned a lot about scaffolding. So my first point of call was understanding the risk, and so talking to a lot of the people that currently do that work, understanding what the best process is that to keep people safe. It's quite scary actually watching scaffolders going up and down scaffolding. I don't know if you've watched them. They kind of they're hooked on, but they're going, they're amazing what the work they do. They're like monkeys. They just can get, I don't know, they're just, amazing. Just sort of watching, learning, talking to people, trying to understand what's the best way to manage these risks. And then trying to, I guess for me, coming from that psychology point of view, really understanding the thinking behind of everyone's behaviour. So you hope that people are going to understand the risk and make sure that they're taking all steps to keep themselves safe. But for every now and again, people will take a risk, and usually that risk is based on they're trying to just get that bit of work done, or they're trying to increase production, or they're trying, they've got good intentions, but they put something else before their own safety, and that's when things go wrong. So trying to understand what those things are that could make people put themselves second rather than putting themselves first. And so as an organisation, then you're trying to, I guess, put rules in place as to what they can and can't do, skills around identifying.
Yes, well, all scaffolders have to, it's like they have to be trained and skilled and have working at heights training. It is pretty well regulated in New Zealand. So pretty much anyone who works at height on a scaffolding is going to have skills and training.
Right.
So from that point of view, they understand the risk, they understand what they're doing, but it's just trying to make sure that they always follow that process. If you're working at height every day of your life and you're going up and down scaffoldings, you naturally become sort of your risk perception reduces. Because if I went up a 10-story cafe, I'd be absolutely petrified. But they do it all day, every day. So it's almost like...
Become a bit blasé about
it's kind of complacency sort of thing. And when you look at all the injury stats in the construction industry, it's not the young people that are getting killed. It's last year, everyone over... all the fatalities in construction were over 40. So you can assume they had their skills and the knowledge to do their job well, and they probably knew what they should do, but for some reason they put themselves at risk and put something else before themselves in that space. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges is people know what they should be doing and how to do it. It's just how do you get them to do that every single time? Yeah,
not thinking, okay, this time I can get away with.
Like we had, we had an incident recently where someone just was doing some work on the outside of the scaffolding, and his colleague just reached over through the scaffolding, not hooked on or anything, to grab the tool to pass to him. And just probably didn't even think about it, but he put himself at risk of falling outside that scaffolding. And he had the best of intentions, but it just put himself at risk. And if things had gone a different way, he may have fallen.
So how do you fix that sort of situation? I guess that's where your behavioural psychology.
It's that whole behavioural. So going back to that time when I was at Goodman Fielder learning, it's all behavioural based. Like, you can have the safest equipment in the world, but if you operate it incorrectly or you bypass those safety devices, you're still putting yourself at risk. So it's really trying to get inside people's heads, which is really the hard bit. So so I mean, where I am at the moment, we're really sort of, we're starting our journey. We've got a little bit of work to do. I think it's probably actually general in the construction industry. Like you said, like Carter's was starting in the 90s. Construction took a while to catch up with that. So still trying to catch up. So so it's just trying to get everyone on the same page. So it's not so much just the people on the front line, but educating managers around the risks and how people are thinking as well, because people tend to try and conform with the environment they're in. And so if the environment is a safe environment where everyone is following the requirements to the letter, then any new person's going to follow that. But if they come in and everyone's just like, oh, don't worry about that, then they're going to follow that. So there's a lot more to it than just, it's not an individual thing. It's really about the whole team and the whole business.
And trying to get it as part of the organisational fabric. This is how we do things.
And it's, I mean, there is definitely tasks that health and safety do outside of the norm, but it should just be part of everyday business. It's not something that you can say, oh, just the safety people look after that, because it's everybody. And
I think it's sort of, there's an inherent life lesson in it, that there's consequences to decisions, and I think a lot of people don't appreciate when they make a decision there's going to be a consequence of their decision. Sometimes it's a minor decision and the consequence doesn't matter too much, but other times the consequence can be surprisingly great and you don't expect it. And I guess we're all bad at not thinking through, we just look at the decision that's in front of us and make it, and you're maybe not thinking a few steps forward. So for me, going down that drive, I just wanted to go home and have my coffee. And I could have been doing half a speed downer and it would have reduced the risk of something going wrong if I'd done that. So
and I think that's really why the key is focusing on critical risks. You can't cover every risk you're going to come across. So you've just got to focus on the key ones where people can get killed or seriously injured. That's where your focus should be. It's not that you ignore the others, but you really focus and make sure everyone understands those risks and has the same narrative all the time. And it's not just about that communication that you have one-on-one or in a meeting, but it's your behaviours as well. So as a manager, it's really important to understand what you do and what you don't do have the same kind of consequences. If you walk past something that's unsafe and you don't say anything and don't do anything, that's just as important as if you did do something that people really notice. And then also it sort of comes down to how your business operates. So if someone does behave in a way that puts themselves at risk, that it's consistent, because there's nothing that turns people off following safety requirements and, oh, well, he gets away with it, but I get in trouble. And it's probably, and I don't think it's necessarily just based on safety, it's just good business. Like if you fear and treat everyone with respect and care about your people, then that's just what safety really is about. I don't think it's rocket science, it's just something that we sometimes forget, because the money drives us a bit too hard.
And that's sort of what I've come to realise about it, is that when I first sort of got it, it was just this whole bunch of rules and things you had to do to make people happy. Whereas I've sort of come to learn that it's actually, thinking through how things work and understanding the consequences of things and process. So to touch on that risk thing, I think a lot of it is also risk reward, is that I'd be interested in sort of your thoughts about how you handle the trade-off between the cost of eliminating that risk versus the risk itself. And so in the construction sector, there's quite a few examples that I'm aware of. So one I remember is, remember Cave Creek? Where the platform fell. And I actually ran into the guy at Brands. And so one of the things that happened in the building industry is they redesigned how cantilever handrails work on decks, and you ended up with this whole lot of extra structure and brackets and bolts and that sort of stuff. And I actually ran into the engineer of Brands who did that, and I said, do you realise just how much extra cost you added for that? And quite how it's related to Cave Creek. there's a bit hard. So it was because it was a cantilevered structure. And I said to him, well, why, what were your thought patterns with it? And he said, look, I was told that it doesn't matter what, just make sure it doesn't fail. And so he effectively has added quite a lot of costs to reduce the risk of a handrail doing that. But it was it happened as opposed to being a conscious decision of that cost trade-off. And that's one of the, when we do work in Australia, that's one of the things is we turn off all of that stuff for handrails in Australia, and I'm not aware of a higher rate of handrails falling off in Australia than there are here. So how do you work through that process of the trade-off between what it costs to reduce the risk versus the impact of that risk?
Yes. So it's a frustration from my point of view as well. I think we're still very junior in our health and safety knowledge in New Zealand, and we do tend to overreact, like you said, just at any cost. And probably the bit where you're talking about, you thought it was ticking the boxes. Well, that's kind of where we headed for quite some time in New Zealand, and that was sort of part of the reason I really wanted to. I moved over to the Pacific Islands because it was a completely different approach, because New Zealand was sort of really going down that tick box process. Was turned around now, and unfortunately, I don't think there's been a lot of decisions made, and it's I don't know. There's the thinking behind them. They've got good intentions, but they don't always understand the consequences for the business. So, I think we've still got a little way to go in New Zealand to actually get a good understanding of understanding how we manage risk. Because you can't, like I said, you can't legislate out all the risks, and you can't tell people exactly what to do all the time. It's just not possible. It's just trying to we have to sort of get that happy medium somehow, and unfortunately we've been a bit reactive in some spaces. So
I'm interested, you mentioned the Pacific. I'm interested in that because that was when you were at Fletcher's, you were in Fletcher Pacific and looked after the health and safety in the Pacific Islands, so I remember that from my wife telling me all about it. So what sort of experience was that? Because their culture is obviously very different, the stage of development of their economies are very different, so what sort of experience and how did you approach that?
So it was an amazing experience. I actually did when I was at McConnell Dow in the Pacific as well. So I had two different companies I worked in the Pacific with. But it was an amazing experience because although they didn't have some of the technical knowledge, they didn't necessarily have the best equipment, but they had the right thinking, and they were all they care about each other. They want each other to go home safe at the end of the day, and that's what we're trying to implement here in New Zealand. Whereas they already have that, and you always hear about the Pacific way, where it takes a lot of time to do everything, and that's very true. But it also meant that on the construction site, people took their time, so we didn't have as many injuries. And I sometimes go to the New Zealand construction sites, and it's just fast-paced all the time. But it doesn't mean any more efficiency. I went to a site recently, talked to the scaffolders, and they said, we've put the scaffolding up at least 3 times in every space in this building. And that's not efficient, costing a lot more money. The scaffolders are quite happy because they get paid, but they're just getting frustrated putting it up and down. And it was more around the efficiency, and it was just that rush to get everything done and meet those milestones rather than sitting back and thinking and planning. So in the Pacific, although sometimes can be very frustrating, everyone just had the time. They'd sit back, think about it rather than just rushing into things. And just I think there's just a better understanding in the Pacific around people come first, and that was just the whole philosophy. So
it's a cultural difference, and that was their perspective of things?
And so we had a lot.
So it was actually easier?
It was, you're saying? Absolutely, totally.
Whereas you'd think the opposite, that you're going into where maybe less sophisticated construction processes, you'd be having to do a whole lot to bring them up to our level, whereas it sounds like what you were doing, it was quite different. It
was, because the whole so the behavioural base was there, and it was just pointing it in the right direction. The technical knowledge and the equipment was the hardest bit, I guess, and they're just not exposed to things like we are, and so that took a lot of work to actually upskill in some of the technical knowledge. But we found once you've had the same employees for some time, they kind of get it. And I actually found in the Pacific, everyone was just really appreciative any time or training that you give them. Whereas in New Zealand, people are like,
it's a hassle.
Exactly.
Health and safety course.
Exactly. And so they just were really appreciative of it. And, any time you would give them some new knowledge, they really were thankful for it. And so it made a big difference because they actually took it on board. Whereas I think, like you said, with the tick box, it really put a lot of people off health and safety, and the Pacific hasn't been through that process. So they actually were still quite open to it. Because I find here in New Zealand, it's getting better, but there's been, unfortunately, a lot of safety people and businesses that have taken that policeman approach, and it just really turns people off. And so, they hadn't been exposed to that, so it was a much easier environment to actually, and we had in the Fletcher's construction division, we had the lowest injury rates, and which is, I think, a reflective of the culture more than anything.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, because we had the worst equipment.
Did you notice much difference across the different islands? Because there's obviously different culture.
Yeah.
We think of them all as Pacific Islanders, but they're all actually quite different.
They're very different, but the same thinking around family comes first.
Right.
It was there. And
so they want to go home and
yeah, absolutely.
And probably for them, the consequences of being injured without ACC, etc., is probably greater in a lot of ways than what it is here.
Absolutely. And they say it's all work as a means to an end. It wasn't. Yeah. So I remember a story we had. One of our staff was doing really well, so he got promoted into a supervisory role, and he just stopped turning up on Fridays. And they're like, well, what's going on? He said, well, I earn the same money in 4 days, so why would I come to work on the 5th day when I don't have to? So it's just a completely different way of thinking about things. Money is good, but it's not the most important thing. And so it was just really, as long as you were willing to embrace that and embrace their culture, it drove the supervisors crazy, because any given day,
you didn't know who was going to turn up.
Yeah, exactly. If there's a funeral or someone was sick, they wouldn't be there. But it just, the managers that and supervisors that thrived in that environment, they just kind of understood that's just how it is. You can't change it. You can't bring your values from New Zealand here to the Pacific. You've got to roll with their values, and that was important to them. And if you respected that, then you got great work out of your employees.
Yeah. So most of our customers are residential builders. So a lot of what you've talked about, it sounds like it's sort of bigger scale building projects. Yeah. So here, I'd not had a lot of exposure to sort of the health and safety processes for them. So I hear hazard code. So we always allow a cost for the hazard code. So how should they be approaching it? So is just having a hazard code pack and sticking the sign up and saying go for it, is that enough? Is that ticking enough boxes?
No. It's a package, and so if you don't actually implement it and use it as it's intended, then it's not going to work. It may cover some aspects of what's required, but you really have to have a look at how that actually applies to your business. I remember when I was at Goodman Fielder, they had this very well developed advanced health and safety system, and then I went to another business that had brought that system off Goodman Fielder to implement, and it didn't work because they didn't have the understanding of that system, and they didn't actually have the buy-in of actually yet to spend a lot of training managers and employees. They just kind of brought the system, thought, oh, this will do, I'll just follow this, but it just never hit the mark. So it's the system as a starting guideline point, but then it's actually just figuring out how to best implement that in your business. And the other one in construction is site safe. I don't know if a lot of businesses do that.
Yeah, that's pretty. Yeah, I hear that a lot. Yeah,
and Tatika, which is the bigger businesses,
right.
But site safe is.
And site safe, so training.
No.
Okay.
No. Site wise. So the site safe, is training, and site wise is actually the approval. Contractor approval process. Right. So if you're going to hire a contractor to come and work on your site, you have a look at their site-wise accreditation, and it's a very process-based system, right. But you do also have to provide evidence that employees have been engaged and involved. Again, you could make up stuff if you really wanted to, but so there's limits to the system. But I think it's a good basis starting point, but then it's figuring out how it works best for your business, because the same system's not going to work the same in every business.
So it sounds like what you're saying is if you treat it as a tick box exercise, you can, and you probably are going to get away with it, but it's not necessarily going to be that effective. And the best thing is to understand why you're ticking those boxes and what are the boxes intending the outcome to be, and then looking at how you're going to better address that, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and getting like as any leader in the leader in the business now, the legislation is quite clear. You need to be covering health and safety. You need to understand it, and you need to be taking steps to keep your employees safe. So it's understanding that, and just seeing how it best fit your business. And sometimes people get a little bit scared of safety and don't like to challenge. And sometimes it is actually good to have a challenge and say, well, this isn't actually going to work in my business. I'll do it another way. Yeah. And think, it's that whole safety. Yeah, there's a little bit of, I think people are a little bit scared of safety sometimes, but I actually really like to have a good debate because my ideas are coming from my perspective, your ideas are coming from your perspective, and if you mould them together and you can come out with a much better solution.
Outcome that actually works for your particular situation.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I think though, because we do a little bit of residential work, one of our businesses does that's exclusively residential work, and the thing with the residential is even faster paced than
smaller projects. You've got like you're talking about subbies being qualified. The typically on a residential house build, there's like 50 to 70 subbies involved, and if you're doing a hotel or whatever, those subbies might be there for 12 months. Yeah, but on a residential, they might be there for half a day.
Exactly.
They're still a health and safety risk. They've still got to fit with whatever you're doing from a health and safety point of view. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's a big challenge. And because of the pressures for financial pressures people have now when they're doing those residential builds, it really, again, that pressure to get things done quickly it seems to be worse than ever from what I can see. And so I went to a site recently and the scaffolders were asked to turn up the same day as the builders were getting the trusses to be installed. So, of course, the builders were there and they're like, well, we want to get our work done. So went up on the half-finished scaffolding. So, and I think that apparently it used to be they would get the scaffolders in a day or two before, but those time pressures and those cost pressures is just bringing everyone closer together. So it makes it even more challenging in that space. And then the scaffolders aren't just putting the scaffolding up, they're trying to challenge the builders and say, can you get down? And that's a whole different set of skills to say to someone, hey, that's not safe, come back down. So there's a lot of pressures in that space. And so I think that planning is really key. And like you said, you've just got so many different trades coming and going. And where I can see it working well is it's where people use the same trades and same tradespeople over and over, and they understand how each other's business works, and that seems to work really well. A little bit like we were at the Simplicity site yesterday on the out by the racecourse, and they seem to have a really well. They have a really good routine about how they go around their construction. They use the same tradies, same processes, and they're one of our customers that always hit these deadlines without fail. But they just seem to have that process really well understood, and they just they've got a really good way and approach about how they tackle their.
Yeah, I've been hearing that quite a bit. I've been reading them about them a bit, and I think what you're sort of touching on there is actually one of the big opportunities in the industry is the whole coordination and scheduling, and that's a big thing with what they do. So while their construction materials, methodologies aren't radically different to how other people build, what they've really done is work out the sequencing of things and ensure that you're getting the right people in the right places at the right time, and they've got a really good understanding from an estimating point of view how long they're going to take, so they're able to predict out their schedule with a high degree of accuracy, and they've got to put a big weighting on expectations around time that you've got to hit your deadlines because they've got other consequences off that, and that's a big learning for me, and I'm sort of spending a bit of time just trying to unpick a bit more about what they're doing to just see how we can take some of those learnings across into other parts of the industry. And so it's interesting to hear that same sort of thing coming through from your thinking.
Just going to a site, you can just, I don't know, if you go to a large construction site, you can feel pretty quickly if it's a well-run...
It's chaotic or not.
Or chaos. Like if everyone knows what they're doing and, they have a purpose and it's well set out, it's just such a completely different vibe to go to another site, and it's just everyone's going everywhere, and it's
and that immediately starts reducing the health and safety risks.
Absolutely.
You're not doing anything different other than everything being organised and everybody knowing what's happened. You've got a lower risk straight away.
Absolutely.
Which sort of comes back to sort of what I was saying in the beginning, is it's all process to try and a lot of business, and it's something that I think in the building industry we're bad at, is actually understanding risk. So whether it's health and safety risk, whether it's design risk, whether it's financial risk, and then building that into our thinking and making sure we account for it.
Yeah, and that's what I learned from the Rank Group experience, because they really understand risk across the board, and they just brought safety into that risk understanding. So I think there's a space we can really all learn across all businesses. And I think one of the big risks that we don't particularly manage still in New Zealand is the quality risk. Because been involved with some of these big constructions industries, there's been some substantial quality issues, and it's because we don't understand that quality risk and we don't manage it as we're going. So it's very heavily again linked to safety, because you work together. So I think there's across the board, and I think it's just part of New Zealand learning and growing, is that we'll get there in the end, but it's just a process.
So for a business like mine, where we're risking a paper cut. How different? What do we do differently in a say if you're an architect or a QS or whatever? What should we be thinking about? Like, we very rarely go to sites. I'm not particularly worried about the site risk side of things. So what should I be thinking about as a business owner? So
although you don't have that physical site risk, but the risk of what you are designing and what you are implementing can be quite impactful to the people that are actually installing at the other end. So you go to a construction site and you'll talk to the guys and whoever said I have to do it this and I have to do it this way, and that puts them at risk. So understanding what your decisions right back at the beginning, how they impact the people that go and work on site, and what products you're using. And again, probably those timeframes are just really important, in that planning and understanding how the decisions you make in your office around how this build is going to go will impact people on the front line, and how can you make it so it makes your job easier. And I think probably a lot of safety is I try really focus on how do I make it so that it's easier for people to follow safety than not to follow safety. And it's probably the same sort of thing, and just thinking about that process. And probably, I think probably architects and designers, that they've probably got there's a lot they can do in that space, just to make sure that what they're designing is not putting our guys at risk on the field. And just thinking about, I've been to a few sites where, the designer wants something to look a particular way, and it would look amazing, but actually to install that puts people at risk. Is there another way you can do it that may not put your installers at risk? And also that also then sort of leads to cost as well, because often if
it's risky, it's costly.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it's just really thinking about what decisions you make will impact the people on the line, down the line, and just that planning. I just think we still, in New Zealand, we're not that great at planning how we're going to do things. And I think that's, like you see with simplicity, they've really got it.
The planning's their big, it's their secret sauce, is the planning.
Exactly. And so, if we could better plan, and that seemed to be with that site I talked about, where they've been putting up the scaffolding 3 times and bringing it down. It was planning,
it's obviously a big cost impact as well as everything else. And more risk. The scaffolders have been, I guess every time they put a scaffold up, there's a risk to it. And they've now got that risk is 3 times because they've done it 3 times.
So, they put it up once because the electrician needed to do work, bring it down, and then we need it up again, we need the sprinklers installed. So, it's just, if they planned it better, it would only go up once and down. And so it helps reduce the cost as well. But I think we're still very junior in that space in construction.
So that's the sort of professional input into the construction process. So what about in the professional office itself? What sort of things should I be thinking about? So we have ticked the box in terms of having we've got some policies in place, but
I mean, you're not going to have a lot of critical risks really. I guess probably the biggest one in office space is the overuse syndrome, and making sure you got a suitable workspace for people. But I guess probably one of the things that is gaining more traction now is that mental health space, and the pressures that you're putting under employees.
And that's, I think it's now ACC recognise it, don't they, the stress. And obviously we've got mates in construction, and the construction sector as a whole has got a pretty poor track record from that perspective. So how as an employer of a bunch of professionals that I try and not put stress onto, but inherently it's a stressy industry.
It is,
There's always deadlines.
Yeah.
It's always difficult to estimate. Yeah, we have to estimate the cost of buildings, but for us, estimating how long it's going to take to do stuff, I'm saying to my staff, we've allowed this many hours.
Yeah.
There's inherently some stress on them because we're guessing how long it's going to take them.
Yeah. And like everyone's individual and how they deal with that. So I guess it's just offering that support, and making sure you're open to having a conversation around it. And like you said, Mates in Construction's doing some amazing work. But the construction industry, I heard on the radio, they're the most businesses gone under in recent times.
It's huge. For business owners like me, it's definitely been
really
the stress level's been higher in the last couple of years than they've been for a while.
Absolutely, and you can see it because every job, you're constantly bidding for work if you're not winning work, and then you start undercutting your prices just to keep the business and keep people employed. But just that stress is just crazy in the construction industry. So I think it's just making sure you are tapping into those services that are available, like Mates in Construction, listening, talking to your workers. There's
so is there anything from a health and safety sort of systems or process point of view we could be doing?
I think probably probably in an office I'd just have a basic understanding, risk register of what you do, what your main risks are and what you say you're going to do, and then actually do it, and then just review that every 12 months or something. But when I go into an office versus you go into a construction site, it's quite a different way of looking at it, and it is generally a much lower risk of someone actually getting hurt, though falling down the stairs is probably
that actually came out from my Carter Holt time, because we were at Manukau then, and it was a 2-story building. Obviously we were working with the sawmills and stuff, and the risks in the sawmills are huge by comparison, and we got a lot of fun poked at us, and that was probably the biggest risk. But it was actually, like I say, it was something relatively minor change.
And it can, and one of the other ones that a lot of offices do, where I've worked in manufacturing, you'll have your office staff and then you'll have your manufacturing space, and the office staff will quite often wear quite inappropriate footwear and then want to go walk through the factory. And so we've had times where it's just like, no, you have to actually take off your high heels. You can't walk through the factory in high heels. So but again, it's that looking at the risk in your environment, in your stairs, your workstations, and one of the big ones that comes up now is the heat fatigue. That's and making sure, because if you've got you've already stressed and then you're in a hot environment, it's going to inflame your stress levels even more.
Make it worse. So I guess it comes back to the risk assessment, so identifying what potential things might happen. Can you do something about them? If you can do it, if you can't, then at least be aware of it and monitor it. I mean, I guess it's that hierarchy of control that you look at. You eliminate, isolate, minimise. So if you can eliminate it, get rid of it. But if you can't, isolate it, and then. But most of your controls in office are going to be administration controls. I mean, if you start getting, you can get occupational health nurses or whatever to come and do a workstation assessment if someone's having problems, because I mean overuse of a mouse or whatever actually can cause some pretty serious long-term incidents. But I guess it's just making sure if someone does start getting that sprain or strain, that they actually let you know and you treat it straight away, because the longer you leave it, the longer it is to recover. And I'm sure there's plenty of people over the years that have been off work for ACC due to those predator strains. So that's probably going to be one of your biggest risks, making sure. And there's lots of technology options now with how you different mice and,
all sorts of things, right?
The challenges of our job. Good lighting, good aircon. And good screens. Good chairs.
And just being a nice place to work in general, I think is pretty key. Being a nice environment that people want to go to work every day.
So coming back to this risk reward thing, it's something that's been in the media a little bit, is looking at scaffolding on houses and looking at what we do between New Zealand and Australia. One of the differences is single story houses, we don't allow for scaffolding by default. In New Zealand, we allow for scaffolding. So this may cause you some internal conflict at it. And from what I understand, the accident rates are lower in Australia than they are here. So even though we scaffold everything, it isn't necessarily helping. So, so what's your thought around that? And I guess there was a move around trying to get ladders off site, which obviously Aussies must still use ladders because they've still got to get up in the air.
Yeah.
So, you got any thoughts around that?
Yeah. It's quite interesting that we've got kind of chosen to go down that path in New Zealand. But again, so one of the biggest frustrations in scaffolding is tampering. So if you put a scaffold up, every tradie's going to come and want to move it, change it around. So pretty much all our scaffolders, that's one of the things we really get them to do is as soon as they turn up to site to have a look at their scaffolding, has someone move something around. So I think it probably goes back to what I was saying before, you can have the safest equipment in the world, but if you override it, it's not going to work. So I think that could be part of the problem because we're putting up scaffolding, blocking access. So the tradies are like, oh, well, there's no scaffolder here, I'll just move it out of the way and just get on with the job. And so that could be part of it.
So I guess the question are we being safer by scaffolding everything, or are the Aussies being safer by doing whatever they're doing?
Yeah, and I don't know if there's a clear answer to that, but I think it still comes down to the individual and how you approach it. So so I guess that's the point I'm trying to get to. You can have all the safety systems and their equipment, but if you've not got the right thinking, it doesn't matter at the end of the day.
And so potentially the Aussies are actually thinking better about safety
they could be thinking,
Yeah,
and it's like you're right, standard operating procedures. We can't, if you tried to tell everyone every potential option, you'd just be writing pages and pages. No one
and nobody reads it anyway.
Reread it, and you'd lose the meaning behind it. So I think potentially we're sort of because people think scaffolding's up, it's safe. I can take. I don't have to think about it anymore. So it's potentially it's the way that we think about it rather than the actual what we use. So
were you in the construction sector when that sort of move happened to try and move away from ladders?
Yes, yeah.
So what's your thoughts of that? And what have you sort of seen any sort of view on productivity as a result? Because in some ways, like we painted my house over last Christmas, and it was actually really good having scaffolding there as opposed to having done it off a ladder. A scary, 2 stories high in places. Scary ladders. So it was good from that point of view, but it cost me $5,000 to scaffold it. So I don't know if you got a view on whether it offset the cost of some productivity gains.
Look, I probably, to be fair, I don't know enough about
sure.
the costs involved.
Yeah, whether anybody did any research into it would be interesting.
Yeah, it would be actually. But like I probably looking back, like I said before, it's not necessarily not knowing what to do. That's the problem. It's the complacency. So if you put up a ladder, you put it up at the right angle, you tie it down, and
you make sure it's got the stays on it or whatever.
Then maybe that's fine for that situation. So
and you're not leaning off it.
So if that and that maybe that's what they do in Australia. They've got a better understanding.
They're happy to go down and move it and go up again.
Rather than trying to just make the most of where that ladder is. So unfortunately, I don't know as much around what they do in Australia, but maybe it is just how they use them versus how we use them. And like I said, and we're way more reactive, I think, in New Zealand. So something goes wrong, and when I've been in these big corporates, is something goes wrong, so they'll implement this rule across the business, and it's just
potentially go too far.
Way too far. And it's just not practical. Rather than actually understanding what was behind it and what you can do to prevent it, they just put a blanket ban. And then the people on site, we have to do this job. How are we going to do it? So they just bend the rules. So, it's just sometimes I think we are just a bit too reactive, and maybe that's just part of the culture in New Zealand. And we've got a bit more work to do to actually understand it's not about the equipment, it's about the people.
So it definitely sounds like you got to. Don't worry about your career. You got plenty of challenges in front of you. There's
plenty of challenges, but it's also the challenge in the safety industry. It's making sure that the business you're in actually understands the risk and where you're trying to go. One of the things I really learned from working at Heinz was to get somewhere you've got to really plan where you want to get to, and you've got to set that goal. And you can't just sort of stumble along expecting things to get better. You actually have to have an idea of where you want to be in 5 years and how you're going to get there.
You got to know where you're going, but you've also got to make that first step.
Exactly. So it was, and the processes and where businesses like that are at, the rest of New Zealand's really still, that was over 10 years ago, and construction's still nowhere near where they were at in their thinking. But it's just a journey and just getting to that point. And it's just as much managers as frontline staff that we need that education and understanding with. Yeah. So
what's the scariest health and safety thing you've seen? Hopefully not very scary. Like my involvement with the steel industry, I've heard some. I haven't seen them, but I heard some really horrific things.
Yeah.
Big machines and ladles of 20 tons of molten steel. Horrific things can happen.
Yeah. Probably the scariest one is. I've been involved with there's pretty scary stuff, and I've been aware of some pretty tragic events that have happened. But probably the scariest one is when I was working in one of the businesses, someone self-harmed in the business. So they actually put what we would use to clean the machinery and equipment, which was basically an acid, and we'd water it down to clean the equipment. And he put it in his gumboot, and so he actually lost significant part of his foot. And that was probably the scariest, because it was just, how do you address this? Because it's a really it just was so out of left field. You just would not expect someone to do that. It also fascinated me, the psychology thinking behind it, and it ended up in court with ACC because the claim was declined because it's self-harm. You can't get claim coverage for self-harm, and it ended up going all through the court system and actually being upheld that it was considered most health self-harm, so the claim was declined. Right. So if you do self-harm, ACC won't cover that, because obviously we don't want people going around injuring themselves. But that's probably the scariest thing, because how do you address that? It's someone,
and as a company, how do you make sure that sort of scenario is not happening?
Because potentially in the construction industry, that's something that could happen quite easily. So it's, I guess it's that whole mental health understanding. So that's probably the scariest thing, because it's like if something falls on someone, you can understand where it's come from and how it's happened, but when something,
and what you do to stop it happening again, whereas
something like that. And it was really difficult for most of the people in the business to understand how on earth you can do that, because this person was obviously in pain for quite some time, left this on his foot long enough to actually eat away at his feet, so that's just trying to, so that's probably the scariest thing. And so, unfortunately, because of my role was investigating and trying to manage that injury, I actually had to see the photos of it, and it was
pretty confronting.
It was not pleasant.
So when I wrote that question, I wasn't really expecting that as the answer. But it's actually, I think it's really good, because it sort of shows that it's, that health and safety is a challenging thing, and it's not predictable.
No.
And I guess, coming back to sort of what I said in my opening, is around process, and you can't plan for a situation like that. So all you can do is look at the process that person ended up in that situation and say, what could I have done differently to avoid that? And that's pretty much the same with any of the health and safety things. So not a great example, but and a tough one for any business to deal with. But I think it really does encapsulate the principles behind what we're talking about.
And it's understanding your people and putting your people first, and and you think back, what could have I done differently to prevent this injury happening, and this person getting into that space where they thought that was the best option available to them. How can you prevent that? And I'm sure if you start looking around at other injuries, I'm sure it's not the only one where it's just this one was a little bit more obvious. And given what we're talking about in mates in construction, suicide is really high in the construction industry. So how can we address that? So I think the scariest thing is understanding people's mental health, because I don't think you ever get to an end point with that one.
So to me, that's actually a good learning from this whole episode, is what could I do differently? And I think it's something that is the right question to ask from a health and safety point of view. But I think in any part of the business is, if you have an outcome that wasn't what you wanted, what could you have done differently?
And the other thing that I'm trying to focus more on too now is when it goes right, learning from that just as much as when it goes wrong, because we tend to, something goes right, we're like, yay, let's move on to the next thing. Whereas if something goes wrong, we analyse it, we look at the details, what could we have done differently? But when it goes right, we don't spend the time to understand what did we do for it to go well.
Yeah, and then could we do that somewhere else?
Exactly. And generally, if safety's going well, the business is going well. So what can we learn from that? So I think that's a really much harder, a lot more effort, a lot more thinking about actually understanding when it has gone well. But I think that would probably be a really good space to start working on and just across the business, really, not just safety. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. So are there any other burning things that you've got that we haven't talked about yet that you may want to raise?
No, I think we've covered everything. It's not an easy industry, construction and safety, ed safety. You've got, there's so many challenges in construction. And that's why I enjoy construction as well, because there's just so much going on and there's so many different challenges. And like in manufacturing, you sort of get things rolling on quite nicely.
Once you sort it starts just sticking.
Whereas you never get to that space with construction. You've always got a new project coming up.
A different site, different risks.
Different challenges. So, and it's not easy, like we talked about before, to actually get that, to take away those risks by implementing mechanical processes that can take away that risk. You're still going to have people putting up scaffolding. You're still going to have builders going up and down, putting the trusses in. There's just nothing you can do to take away from that. So, so you're still going to have people. So as long as you have people, you have people, you have challenges.
And variability.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but I think probably going back to that simplicity model, they seem to have really done really well in that space. So, so I'm trying to see what we can learn from my perspective, what they do well that we can do in our business as well. Yeah.
That's great. Well, thanks for taking the time to talk to us today. Right. So thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that today. So I'm Nick from Your QS. If you want to deal with a QS that is really interested in understanding how businesses tick and looking to try and improve what we do and look to work with you to improve your business, then get in touch. If you want to understand more about health and safety, I'm sure Bronwen would be happy to talk to you. And if you want some scaffolding, she'll be able to help you with that as well. Thanks.